Hello and welcome to yet another edition of World Panorama. You'll get all the big international news stories that unfolded this week in the next 30 minutes. I'm Aishwarya with you. Here's a look at the top headlines first. President Tsai Ing-wen reconfirmed as leader of Taiwan, says her Democratic Progressive Party committed to independence from China. Beijing insists vote won't change its claims of sovereignty over the island. Rain brings relief in bushfires-stricken Australia. Morrison government pledges 50 million Australian dollars to help rescue and protect affected wildlife. Environmental groups warn some species may have already been driven to extinction. US and China sign a deal to ease the trade war. China to boost US imports by $200 billion above 2017 levels. Strengthen intellectual property rules. US to halve some new tariffs on Chinese products. Two leaders call it a win-win deal. And anti-government protests in Iran over government's handling of Ukrainian plane crash. Leadership also under pressure as US imposes further sanctions and European powers trigger dispute process. Our top story is from Taiwan, where incumbent President Tsai Ing-wen's government won another 4-year term by a landslide. And her Democratic Progressive Party also gained a majority in parliament. The crushing victory for Tsai has just provided an unwelcome New Year's present for Chinese President Xi Jinping. And that's because Taiwanese President Tsai put her defense of her country's sovereignty and democracy at the very center of her electoral campaign. However, China insists the outcome of the vote would not change its claims of sovereignty over the island. Joyful supporters of President Tsai Ing-wen waving flags and cheering. This after results showed that Taiwanese have re-elected President Tsai for another 4-year term by a landslide. The result comes as a stern rebuke to China, as Tsai has refused to acknowledge that Taiwan is a part of one China. After her win, Tsai urged China to review its policies towards the island.
Taiwan people declined a one-country, two-system model. We respect democracy and our sovereign rights. I hope this election result sends China a clear message that they clearly will understand what Taiwan people want and insist.
The celebrations were seen not only in Taiwan but also in faraway Hong Kong. Hundreds of protesters rallied in Hong Kong's Edinburgh Place. Tensions with China as well as months of anti-government unrest in Hong Kong had taken center stage in Tsai's campaign. She had held out Taiwan as a beacon of hope for protesters in Hong Kong.
I felt very happy when I heard about the election results in Taiwan, as we don't want Taiwan to end up the same way as Hong Kong.
However, Beijing has blamed what it called fake news as well as Western interference for Tsai's victory. China considers democratic Taiwan as its own territory and has tried military threats and economic inducements to get the island to accept its rule. Taiwan says it is an independent country. Beijing insists on the so-called 92 census that acknowledges Taiwan as a part of single Chinese nation. Beijing says it would not change its policy for Taiwan to one country, two systems framework like the one for Hong Kong.
2019年1至11月
We have adhered to the One China principle and the 1992 consensus, resolutely cracked down on and checked all forms of secessionist activities aimed at Taiwan independence, and maintained overall peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
直接投资同比增长。
Over the past 4 years, the Chinese government has ramped up economic, military and diplomatic pressure on Taiwan. But the strong arm tactics pushed voters to support Tsai's Democratic Progressive Party and also fueled in part by China's hardline response to months of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. Heavy rain fell across parts of fire-ravaged eastern Australia this week from Thursday onwards, giving some relief to catastrophic bushfires. This even as Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison expressed regret over the handling of the crisis and proposed a powerful judicial inquiry known as the Royal Commission into the handling of the fires. The fires have claimed 28 lives and killed an estimated 1 billion animals. In this report, we look at the wildlife catastrophe that the fires have triggered. The government has pledged $50 million to help rescue and protect the wildlife affected by the bushfires. But environmental groups warn that some species may have already been driven to extinction. Australia National Park in New South Wales in ruins. Once a lush green forest, now all one can see here is burnt trees, destroyed habitats. The fire also devoured a fruit store that used to attract large number of visitors in the park. Similar scenes at the Kangaroo Island, a usually wildlife-rich tourist attraction off the south coast, which has been hit by blazes. Australia and New Zealand military personnel searched for and cleaned up dead animals.
Scientists are estimating that maybe 30% of koala habitat has been lost here in northern New South Wales. We know that habitat's recently been lost on Kangaroo Island, so that we know that koalas have really taken a hit. It will be some time before we know exactly what that means for their numbers.
Those few animals that survived the bushfires were found during the recovery mission and were moved to the veterinary services. Veterinarians and nurses here working round the clock to tend to the burnt wounds of koalas.
They were infernos. It's amazing that some have survived, but they have, and we're going to do our best to get them back to full health and then ultimately be back to the wild when they're ready.
Government is using helicopters and airplanes to help feed starving animals displaced by wildfire crisis. Under the mission known as Operation Rock Wallaby, thousands of pounds of food, mostly carrots and sweet potatoes, airdropped. Not just government and medical professionals, local residents are pitching in together to save animals from bushfires, giving food and water to injured ones. International aid is also pouring in form of comforting blankets and pouches for kangaroos, bats and birds. But not all can be saved. Many animals that are severely burnt are being euthanized. As experts say, they might be unable to live with the injuries or overcome the scarcity of food and water. Also, about 10,000 camels were shot down as they pose threats to communities, scarce water resources and are destroying and eating up food supplies.
He had very severe burns on his feet. He was unable to move, and in those cases we cannot bring the big boys into care. One there weigh over 70 kilos, so it's physically impossible to lift them, let alone carry them in a vehicle and to take them to the vets. So in this case, sadly, he had to go to his maker. He had to be put down.
As more than 1 billion animals are already dead in bushfires since September, many species may have already been driven to extinction. The Morrison government has pledged $50 million Australian dollars to help rescue and protect wildlife affected by the bushfire crisis, with a promise of more to come.
We're making an announcement about $50 million as an initial contribution to protecting our wildlife and restoring the habitat. This has been an ecological disaster, a disaster that is still unfolding.
Environmentalists have written a letter to the government wherein they have raised specific concerns for species that have had all or key parts of their entire habitat burned. It lists 13 animal species, including 3 critically endangered ones. Environmental groups have welcomed the government's $50 million commitment as a good first step, but say more would be needed, adding that safeguarding species into the future would require protection of critical habitats and funding for recovery actions, as well as stronger national environmental laws. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And after more than 2 years of rising tensions, the US and China have signed a deal aimed at easing their trade war. The deal sets the stage for a stronger relationship between the two countries and hoping for a further softening of trade tensions between the world's 2 largest economies. Here is a look at the first phase of the latest US-China trade deal.
It is finally on paper. The US on Wednesday signed the first phase of a trade deal with China. It is a deal that aims to ease the trade war that has rattled markets and weighed on the global economy. Signed on Wednesday in Washington, the deal brings down the curtain on more than a year of tough negotiations, including several months of suspension of talks between the 2 largest economies of the world. The 2 sides described the pact as historic and a win-win agreement.
Today we take a momentous step, one that has never been taken before with China, toward a future of fair and reciprocal trade as we sign phase 1 of the historic trade deal between the United States and China.
这是一份互利共赢的协议。
This is a mutual, beneficial and win-win agreement. It will stabilize global economic development, promote world peace and prosperity. And it is in the interest of the producers, consumers and investors in both countries.
同时，协议不针对。
So what does the deal say? According to the terms of the pact, China has pledged to boost US imports by $200 billion above 2017 levels and strengthen intellectual property rules. In exchange, the US has agreed to halve some of the new tariffs it has imposed on Chinese products.
I think it's very positive that the 2 largest economies in the world, the US and China, has agreed on the first step on trade. I think that is sending positive growth signals not only to China and to the US but to the rest of the world. I hope that based on this agreement there will be a second phase and a third phase, because we know that China and the US is more than 40% of the global economy. And if these 2 nations can find solutions, I think that is also positive for the rest of the world.
See, the main dispute between the US and China was regarding 2 issues. The first issue was that the US had a tremendous trade deficit with China. And the second issue was that the US government felt that China was stealing technology from them and from the rest of the world. The fact that the deal has been signed means that the uncertainty globally that was there because of the 2 largest economies basically squabbling with each other, those tensions will now ease.
However, US will maintain up to 25% tariffs on an estimated $360 billion worth of Chinese goods, and China, which has levied new tariffs on $100 billion worth of US products, is also expected to maintain the majority of them. Experts say it is only a small proportion of the tariffs being reversed, and relatively minor concessions is being granted by both sides. They add that Washington's fundamental complaints about Chinese practices, from its approach to subsiding businesses to cyber theft, remain unresolved. However, Trump has defended maintaining the bulk of the tariffs, saying they will provide leverage in future talks.
But this so-called deal does next to nothing of substance for workers and businesses feeling the brutal, merciless weight of China's trade and industrial abuse. I greatly fear that President Xi is laughing at us behind our backs for having given away so little at the expense of American workers, farmers, and businesses.
The US and China have engaged in a tit-for-tat tariff war since 2018, which has led to extra import taxes being levied on more than $450 billion worth of traded goods. The ongoing dispute has disrupted trade flows, dampened global economic growth, and unnerved investors. Bureau Report, Raj Sabha TV.
And here we'll take a very short break, and after the break, we tell you about an erupting Taal volcano in the Philippines which remains life-threatening. Authorities advising thousands of displaced villagers not to return to the danger zone. All the details coming up ahead. Stay tuned. There have been anti-government protests in capital Tehran and other cities after the Iranian authorities admitted that they had unintentionally shot down a Ukrainian international airlines plane. The protesters have condemned the authorities for not initially telling the truth about Iranian missiles shooting down the plane. Slogans have been heard against Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the Islamic regime. The Iranian leadership is also under pressure on the economic front as the US has imposed further sanctions, and European powers also put Iran on notice over nuclear deal breaches. This new decade's first weeks began with the US targeted killing of Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani in a missile strike. The week ended with a tragic unintended cost of conflict, Iran admitting it mistakenly shot down a Ukrainian passenger jet, killing all 176 people on board. This week saw widespread angry protests in Iran over the incident. On Wednesday, President Hassan Rouhani appealed for national unity and also called on the military to give full account of how it shot down the plane.
We will continue on this path to discover all the aspects of this accident and to punish those who were involved and to finally reassure people that such an incident will not be repeated.
The Ukrainian International Airlines Boeing 737-800 was traveling to Kiev from Tehran on 8th of January when it crashed shortly after takeoff. The countries of plane crash victims are now seeking a thorough international investigation into the plane crash.
The members of the coordination group have drafted a framework for cooperation with Iran, which we will publish online later on today.
Meanwhile, while direct military confrontation between the US and Iran may be over for now, but tensions are not over. On Thursday, Pentagon said that several US troop members were injured during Iranian missile attack on air bases in Iraq, despite US President Donald Trump initially saying that no casualties had taken place. After that attack, President Trump had ruled out military action, but he ordered new sanctions against Tehran that took effect this week.
As previously announced by the President, we are announcing additional sanctions against the Iranian regime as a result of the attack on U.S. and allied troops.
European powers have also triggered a formal dispute mechanism over Iran's breaches of key parts of 2015 nuclear deal, ratcheting up pressure on the Islamic Republic. That means the dispute is now referred to a joint commission that will have a minimum of 15 days to resolve the issue.
The aim of the dispute resolution mechanism is not to reimpose sanctions. The aim of this mechanism is to resolve issues relating to the implementation of the agreement within the framework of the Joint Commission.
Indeed, US-Iran tensions are not over and the next few weeks could continue to be rocky. Iran's leadership, meanwhile, continues to be under pressure with protests in the country over its handling of Ukraine plane crash. There were protests seen in Iran earlier too in 2017 and 2018 over worsening economic conditions.
Protests had erupted again in November last year after the government raised petrol prices. And pressure on leadership will increase in the days to come, with more US sanctions coming into effect and European powers mulling sanctions over Iran's breaches of nuclear deal. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And here is a look at some more international news stories in Global Buzz. The US House of Representatives on Wednesday formally handed off 2 articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump to the Senate, clearing the way for a trial. The House passed a resolution to submit articles of impeachment that passed largely along party lines by 228 votes to 193. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi signed copies of the articles alongside the team of Democratic lawmakers who will prosecute the case against Trump. The House of Representatives, remember, impeached Donald Trump on 18th of December for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress for his refusal to participate in the impeachment inquiry. Trump has denied any wrongdoing. The Senate, controlled by Trump's Republican Party, will now decide whether to convict and remove him from office. Russia's government has resigned hours after President Vladimir Putin proposed sweeping constitutional changes that could prolong his stay in power. Putin is due to step down in 2024 when his 4th term of office comes to an end, but there is speculation that he could seek a new role or hold on to power behind the scenes. Putin put forward his plans in his annual State of the Nation address to lawmakers, and later Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev announced that the government was resigning to help facilitate the changes. Putin has named a tax service chief, Mikhail Mishustin, as the Russia's new Prime Minister. At least 18 civilians are reported to have died in airstrikes that hit a market and an industrial zone in the Syrian rebel-held city of Idlib. A monitoring group said that Russian and Syrian government planes carried out the attacks. The airstrikes happened despite a ceasefire brokered earlier this month by Russia and Turkey. Idlib, remember, is the capital of the northwest province of the same name and is the last stronghold of rebel groups. And a passenger plane dumped fuel over several schools as it made an emergency landing at Los Angeles International Airport. At least 60 people, many of them children, were treated for skin irritation and breathing problems. Fuel may be dumped in emergency landings, but only over designated areas and at a high altitude, aviation rules stipulate. The Delta Airlines flight returned to the airport due to an engine issue, and Delta confirmed that the passenger plane had released fuel to reduce its landing weight. Taal volcano in the Philippines has been erupting for a week now, blasting steam, ash and debris into the sky, and it shows no signs of stopping. Scientists are monitoring the situation remotely using ground and space instrumentation, and they say that the volcano remains life-threatening despite weaker emissions and fewer tremors as magma was moving beneath. Now, thousands of displaced villagers have been advised not to return to the danger zone. It is one of the Philippines' most active volcanoes. Taal volcano this week began spewing lava, triggering earthquakes and emitting huge plumes of ash. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismologically raised its danger warning to level 4, indicating that a hazardous explosive eruption is possible within days. The warning prompted tens of thousands of people to evacuate. United Nations says that more than 450,000 people are estimated to live within the 14-kilometer danger zone. Thousands have already been evacuated, but many remain behind. Manila's Ninoy Aquino International Airport was closed, so were schools and colleges in the region. Lava continued to gush out of the volcano through the week, and clouds of ash blew more than 60 miles north, reaching the Manila region, which is home to 12.9 million people.
We saw a group leaving and we decided to leave our home and join them. I was worried and didn't want my children to get stuck in case something happens. I was only able to grab a few clothes before leaving.
Clouds of ash have shrouded nearby towns and Manila, prompting worried residents to stock up on face masks. Experts say that as Taal volcano sits in a lake, the combination of magma with lake water makes the ash particularly harmful to people's health. Not just humans, crops that are cloaked with volcanic ash are also damaged. Over $10.9 million worth of crops have been damaged. Pineapple farmer Jack Imperial is devastated.
We will not be able to harvest the pineapples that are already due for harvesting. We just have to accept that we will incur a loss. Even if we are able to harvest some pineapples, if customers are scared to come because of the eruption, the pineapples would just end up rotting.
Taal is tiny as volcanoes go, but it has been deadly before, and experts say it is a dangerous volcano. Taal is defined as a complex volcano. It does not have just one main vent or cone, but several eruption points that have changed over time. While thousands had to flee, some tourists stopped by Tagate city to get a view of the eruption.
It's let's say once in a life, experience for us, because we have not this phenomena in our country. So for me, it's very, very, very interesting, let's say.
At least 35 Taal eruptions have been reported within the last few hundred years. The most recent was in 1977. The Philippines lies on the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is the most seismically and volcanically active zone in the world. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And before we go, take a look at the zebras that are on the loose in La Paz's chaotic streets. Don't be alarmed. Men dressed as zebras are part of a road safety awareness campaign in Bolivia. They scold drivers for any transgressions in a humorous and positive way. So here are the visuals of zebras waving their hooves to help people cross the roads and seek to raise awareness amongst the drivers to stop at traffic lights and give way to the pedestrians. I'll take your leave now. I'll see you next week in another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.